The South African Federation of Trade Unions attended a Nedlac meeting in Johannesburg. The union says it will aggressively push a pro-worker policy agenda following its admission to Nedlac. The meeting is being held at a time when the country is facing economic and development challenges exacerbated by the ongoing energy crisis. Saftu spokesperson Trevor Shaku joins us now for more on this. Trevor, thank you for making time for us. So all of the Nedlac partners are meeting, and as they meet, there's still no social compact to address the crisis of unemployment, of slow economic growth, a year after this commitment was made. Is this the moment where they can agree on that?
Thanks, good Clement, for having us. Look, we don't think that the issues of unemployment, the sluggish economic growth, the issues around the interest rate hikes and the inflation rate that has been going up are actually a matter of a social dialogue, in our view, that would result in a social compact. In our view, this is one of the ways in which the government and business are actually abdicating responsibility by, of course, trying to bring the partners in that particular dialogue to discuss that. But we know, as a matter of fact, that there are two entities that are supposed to be responsible for the creation of employment, development of infrastructure, and ensuring that we beat inflation, and also that the Reserve Bank change its inflation targeting strategy through interest rates. But they are not doing so. Firstly, let's start with business. Business has actually been on an investment strike for quite some time. In 2016, a report by researchers from the University of Johannesburg would have shown that the investment strike amounted to about 1.4 trillion that was sitting with people who were supposed to invest it but were not investing it. Now, that is more than 7 years ago. If we are to imagine that money is sitting in financial assets at the various banks, but also at the South African Reserve Bank, so with Treasury and all of that, because they buy government bonds, we would know that money would have increased, and the increase of that particular money would have meant that the investment strike has catapulted beyond 1.4 trillion that we know, but would have gone beyond 2 trillion. So those are some of the investments which business ought to be investing in the economy to create jobs, but they're not doing so. Government, on the other side, the recent bulletin of the South African Reserve Bank shows that as a part of the gross fixed capital formation, which measures investments throughout the economy, including those from government and from business, shows that even business has been divesting from the economy. We know this not only because of the statistics published by State South Africa and the South African Reserve Bank, but also because the evidence is there for us to see. They've been told to divest from state corporations. That is the reason why they're embarking on a privatization path with a jobs blood path in the way. So the issue here for us is not a question of social compact. We think that even in our social dialogue, we are not equal. We are not equal partners. Two important partners have to ensure that there's creation of jobs so that we beat unemployment in this country.
So what do you think has been difficult for the social partners to agree on a comprehensive plan?
Because this comprehensive social compact is actually a matter requiring that labor make sacrifices and compromises. And some of those compromises, you would know that it is business that has been complaining about trade unions having disproportionate powers in the economy, and that's the reason why there's huge protective laws. They actually even say this is part of the red tape, this is part of the problems which cause South African economy not to grow and to create jobs. Because for them, you might deregulate the labor market so that you allow the market, the business enterprises to be able to exploit workers at will without any form of protection. And that is what they are looking for. So we see that out of the social compact, and for them to actually be satisfied that there will be social compact, one, labor has to make those particular compromises where it stops its proper regulation and its proper protection of workers' rights and workers' interests. But secondly, it wants the government to create a conducive and enabling environment for the business sector, so that the business sector can be able to be guaranteed of rigging profits at higher rates. And this is because, and we see this coming through and through in various other platforms where we are participating. In the PCC, they are the ones who are saying in order for us to transition from the fossil fuel intensive economy into a renewable economy, government is going to have to foot certain forms of guarantees so that these particular business enterprises can be able to make profits. Now, one of those particular guarantees is that government has to lobby money from the finance institutions and take this money and take it into a form of what they call blended financing, where government will de-risk the risks which are latent in any business enterprise from these businesses. But secondly, the government has to also guarantee some form of demand. In other words, because capitalism is based on production of commodities which with the purpose of realizing profit, and realization of profit cannot happen without the circulation of the goods and services. So they want government to guarantee a safe and proper circulation of those particular goods. So we see this particular social compact as a call for merely a compromise on part of the labor movement and on the part of government, where we are all going to be de-risking the profit-making of businesses.
You are part of this summit. What contribution do you want to make at the summit? You were there earlier today?
I was part of the summit. The unfortunate part is that the summit is merely a reporting mechanism. There's no dialogue there actually. There's not even an interaction. What happens is that they invite their social partners and various stakeholders to come and present and make a review of the performance. On top of that, you then have various other individuals coming to speak on matters of interest. They call them crises and all of those things. So it was just a matter of a talk show where people who have a view on certain things were able to present. But to take something very positive out of the annual summit itself is that the various stakeholders have pointed, including communities, have pointed to the failures of government, that the body and the stakeholder that is actually not playing its role to the optimal and effectively is government in this instance. The reports, for instance, from Dr. Suleiman of the Gift of the Givers showed a shocking revelation of how government is incapacitated on the part of responding to crisis, responding to disasters, that they lack a proper strategy, there's no personnel, equipment is missing, all of those things which are required. But of course, Labour also pointed out most of the issues which we are having a problem with. So in my view, is nothing, because the annual summit has ended actually. So there's nothing to take out of the annual summit. It is just a matter of reporting and nothing else.
Okay. Load shedding remains the biggest risk to our economy, still destroying businesses and jobs. What do you think Labour and business can do, to contribute towards a solution? Because government is clearly struggling.
Look, on the part of Labour, already we are providing our own workers. So those workers whose labour power is rendered in those power stations, in fixing the power lines of the grid, in ensuring that there's distribution. That is already the contribution of the people we represent. So on the part of business, we did not want actually business involvement in this. Business involvement in this is for us to call on them to stop negotiating for special tariffs, because special tariffs are creating problems of revenue for government. And as a result, government tries to salvage and to recoup the lost costs because of these special tariffs through the tariff structure of the future, which impact on the ordinary consumers, the households who are the households of the workers we represent. So we want business to stop negotiating those in our view. But we think solution of the load shedding crisis in the country can only come from government. And that is the reason why Saftu strategy has been to call for the fixing of Eskom. We call it a public pathway. That there are three things which we've got to actually look at. The first one is that we are in a load shedding crisis, and that in that load shedding crisis, we cannot let the vertically integrated Eskom to be dismantled and unbundled. What ought to happen, and the dancing minister has shown a little in the past few months, that they can be able to maintain and fix to a point where we are able to go back to the energy available factor at a higher rate, where our people are guaranteed of electricity for the most part of the day. So already there is a sign that we can fix the existing fleet. So we are calling on government to actually invest more into ensuring that the existing fleet is fixed, but also that the renewables, which unfortunately are being championed by the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program, which is merely a form of auctioning the provision and the generation of electricity from the private sector through the so-called IPPs, is problematic, and we do not think that should be. What ought to be happening here is that both the question of solving the load shedding crisis and at the same time solving the question of the energy transition ought to be the responsibility of government through ESCOM. And in other words, ESCOM must actually be the one that is building the capacity for the renewable energy sources, at the same time whilst fixing the existing fleet, which we know if fixed, it will be able to provide electricity to the people who are connected to the grid.
But it doesn't have capacity for that, which is why they've been trying to get the private sector to even generate its own electricity so that can add capacity to the grid.
No, they've dismantled it. It has the capacity. That particular entity has the capacity. The unions which are affiliated to Saftu, which are organizing in the energy and electricity sector, shows that we have people who are first and foremost on skill level capacitated. So the question might be maybe at the governance structure, but whose responsibility is it to do governance of that particular entity? It is government. So it is government that is failing. And part of us calling for fixing of ESCOM is not a question only of maintaining the fleet, but it's also fixing the management and governance structure of that entity so that it can function properly. But secondly, we think that government does not, because one of the arguments that is put forward is that government does not have money. The capacity they are referring to is finance. Is the government does not have money, which we do not agree with that particular assertion, by the way. And we came out guns blazing condemning the decision by the National Treasury to have the cost-cutting measures, which includes the freezing of posts. But let me come back to ESCOM. We think that the government is not constrained financially to be able not only to assist ESCOM, but to assist all its state-owned enterprises and to also even assist the state institutions which require this financial assistance as much so that they can be able to deliver the services that they need to deliver, but on the part of ESCOM to produce electricity and fix it.
All right, let me get your thoughts on that issue you mentioned. Government recently announcing that it's running out of money, and they're asking departments to rein in spending to avoid a budget blowout. This will include, as you say, freezing some posts. Do you see any consequences to this?
There are serious consequences, but Clement. The first one is that if you freeze posts, you are going to plunge the public service into a serious crisis. Already it is in a crisis. There's a constant decline of quality of services that are offered in the public service. That is the reason why a number of people, including the very public servants themselves, are not using the very public services. It's because of the declining quality of those services. So the first one, which will be affected, is that you are going to have a ratio of the public servants to the population declining. And that has ripple effects across all public service. In health, you are going to continue to have more than what... So at the current moment, the public health sector has one nurse is to 224 patients that they must service. One doctor is to 3,198 patients that they have to service. Social development, having one social worker for 5,000 patients who they must be able to service.
Okay.
The education sector, basic education sector, having one teacher, 231 learners in classroom. This has created serious problems. And as a result, overcrowding in classrooms, overcrowding in hospitals. That is the reason why you find the crisis we find ourselves in. And when that happens, you also have serious crises, including questions of attending the very patients. For instance, the number of horrors of preventable deaths that are occurring in hospitals and clinics are as a result of the reduction in the headcount in the public service. So we're totally opposed.
Trevor Shaku, we're out of time. Thank you for making time for us. That's spokesperson for Saftu.